Hey, thanks for checking out Nuts and Bolts with Tone, and welcome to the channel. Today I'm going to talk about something about filling up a cooling system. So, in order to fill up a cooling system properly, let me rephrase that. Properly and efficiently, you should really use a vacuum refiller. So I use an AIRLIFT. I've had my AIRLIFT for, I don't even remember how long, 10 years, 12 years. I've had it for a really long time. I like that brand. I know that I know Snap-on and Mac and Master Cool and all these other brands. I know that there's other brands out there that make vacuum refillers. However, I just personally like the AIRLIFT, and if mine broke, I would buy another AIRLIFT exactly like what I have right now. I'll put a link in the description below for the AIRLIFT just because that's what I use. So when you use this AIRLIFT, what it does is it sucks the thermostat open and it backfills the cooling system. So that way, in most cases, you can fill up the cooling system, put the cap on it, and go. I mean, you're not going to do that because you always want to make sure that everything is okay. However, in most cases, you can. Now, if everything goes right, you put your AIRLIFT on, and you hook up the first attachment. And I will show you a demonstration of how each attachment works. But you hook up the first attachment and you stick one end of the hose in a bucket, because sometimes it spits and sputters a little bit of coolant just so it doesn't make a mess. You're going to need a bucket for when you fill it. So just get the bucket ready to go. You're going to use that and you're going to stick the air hose on there, and it's going to vacuum it down. Now, I've had mine for a really long time, and I'm not sure if mine ever went to 20 inches. I think it's 20 inches on the gauge. But mine, usually around 18 inches, is about as far as mine will go. But that's fine. 18 inches for mine means that it's fully vacuumed down. And when you do that, you'll notice that all the hoses, they'll suck completely shut. I mean, they'll flatten them. It's actually pretty cool to see it. And once you've done that, now, let's say you want to see if you have a leak. Well, if you have a leak, I'll show you. You close the valve that's closest to the body of the tool. When you close that valve, that is closing off the cooling system from the hose. Now, if everything is perfect and you don't have a leak and you're sealed nice and neat on the radiator, in most cases your vacuum won't drop. In some cases, the vacuum will drop. It'll drop slowly. It could drop more rapidly. And if it doesn't drop, okay, great. You close the valve, disconnect the air hose, disconnect that attachment, and then you connect the other attachment, which on the other end it has a bulb thing with a screen on it. Well, that's to keep garbage from going through your AIRLIFT, because that'll damage it. And it won't damage it, it just won't work right. And so then you put that end in and you fill it all the way up. Now, there's two things about this. There's two different kinds of cooling systems. There's a cooling system where you fill it directly on the radiator, and then there's a cooling system where you're going to fill it through a degas bottle. When you fill it through a degas bottle, sometimes the bottle is like this tall, and the maximum mark's in the middle. Well, what I try to do is, I usually, with a couple inches left, I'll usually stop. But really what you want to wait for is that upper hose to start to release. Once that upper hose starts to release, you can disconnect it and then just top it off from there. But in some cases, the last one I did was the Ford 500 I did a transmission on. That one, it wouldn't let go until the bottle was filled all the way up to the top. So in that case, you have no option but to fill it up until it's full, and then suck out the coolant with your fluid evacuator. Because you don't want to stop it too soon. You don't want to stop the test too soon to try to leave room, because sometimes maybe it didn't fill it properly through the thermostat, and then you're going to end up with cooling system problems, and you're going to have an issue. So if you're filling it through the radiator, you're going to fill it all the way until it goes to zero. And then you're going to top it off. You're going to, remove your equipment, top off the radiator, and put the cap on. Now, if you're filling through a radiator style system where you have a vent hose that comes out by the cap for the cap to release and it to push the coolant into an overflow, You have to pinch that off with vice grips or cap it off, one way or the other. All right, so once you've done all of that, now it's filled, and then now you want to make sure that you run it with the heater on. I always start it up, heater on, full blast, and I let it go. And 99% of the time, as soon as the cooling system starts to warm up, the heater will blow hot, turn off the heater, let it run, make sure that there's no leaks, everything is good. Now, in some cases, I used my AIRLIFT for this video. You will see I used it on 2 separate vehicles. I used it on a Ford 500, which everything went perfect, filled it up to the top, it was all done, perfecto, okay? And then I used it on a Corolla, and that one had an issue. Now, that one was kind of weird. When I put my vacuum portion on there, it sucked it down to like 16 inches, but it wouldn't go beyond 16 inches. When I closed the valve, the vacuum started to slowly drop. Now those necks of the radiators, they're only like this tall. So you're barely biting with the tool when you bite down. You can bite down enough to get it to work. But if that happens, what you gotta do is you gotta have I always get the coolant ready. I put the hose in the coolant. I have the hose laying right next to my AIRLIFT, the main body of the AIRLIFT. And I close the vacuum, the switch to lock it off, disconnect the hoses, plug the coolant hose on, and then open the valve and let it go, and just top it off. So that's what you have to do in some cases of those Toyotas or Hondas where you have little tiny radiator necks. But everything usually is okay. 99% of the time, everything is okay. Now let's get into this, and let me show you how it works. All right, so step one is you put this right here in the radiator, and you use this attachment here, and you hook it to an air hose, put the other end in a bucket in case it spits out, and then you let it vacuum down until it gets down as far as it'll go. And then you hook up the other attachment here, which has a valve on it, and you stick the other end in coolant, and you let it fill up until it's done. Then you close this valve here to keep anything from leaking out. Sometimes on these Toyotas and stuff like that, where they have this little tiny filler neck, little tiny radiator neck, your vacuum will drop just because of the design. And so you have to hurry up and just switch connections and fill it up, because it won't hold the vacuum because of the design of the radiator. Last tip is when you're dealing with a radiator, not a degas bottle type, but a radiator that has a vent hose that goes to the bottle, you have to pinch it off or disconnect it and put a cap on it. Okay, so we're going to fill this cooling system the right way. So we're going to get the AIRLIFT out. Get this guy here, and we're going to use the middle one. The middle adapter is the one you will use almost all the time. Just put that in there. You're going to just put this in here, tighten it down. Now on this design, there is no vent hose that you have to pinch off. So this one here, we're just going to hook up and let it suck down. But if there's like a vent hose off the radiator or something, you have to pinch that off. Alright, so the next thing we're going to do, we got 2 hoses here. We're going to take this hose here. It's got one end, and the end looks like this. This is for the air hose. This is to go to the AIRLIFT. We're going to put this end into a bucket. We're going to hook this up like that. Now it's going to get a little noisy because we're going to be having air. All right, so we're gonna let this thing suck down. Mine will usually go to about 28 inches, maybe 27 sometimes. It just depends. So all the hoses will pinch shut. They'll suck completely flat. And that's because it put this cooling system into a vacuum and sucked the thermostat open. So now that we've sucked this thing down, if you wanted to check to make sure you didn't have an immediate leak, you close the valve and you watch your vacuum reading. And if your vacuum reading stays pretty normal, you're okay. Sometimes, oh, and this is the valve to close it. Sometimes you actually have to put coolant into it to find a leak if it's losing vacuum. All right, so we disconnected that. Make sure you close this valve or all your vacuum goes away. So the next hose we're gonna use is this one here. This has got a closed valve and it's got a end for the coolant. You notice it has a screen in there so you don't put any garbage through there. All right, so this one here. All right, so this one here, we've got the one end in coolant, we've got the other end hooked up, and now we're just gonna open the valve. And then right before it gets empty, as soon as it starts to spit and sputter when it's sucking, when the coolant's gone, you wanna close this valve so it doesn't suck air. So, I'll tell you about the next part in 1 second, because this is a half a bottle. All right, you probably couldn't hear that. All right, so now when you have a bottle like this, when you have a degas bottle, that usually the coolant level is half. So what you have to do is this thing, all the vacuum won't go away until this thing's filled all the way up. So in some cases you actually have to fill the bottle up and then suck it back out. So what we're gonna do in this case is we're gonna be watching all these hoses for them to open up. Once they start to open up, then we can release the machine. Gotta get a little bit more. This one here, I replaced the transmission on, and I actually ended up having to drop the whole engine and subframe and cradle and everything together because I had nowhere to hang the engine. All right, so what's gonna happen is we're gonna close this valve. There's gonna be a little bit of coolant here, so I always put a rag just to catch it. This hose, when you're all done, make sure you turn it upside down. It'll still hold some coolant. And it'll fill your box up here. What I do with this AIRLIFT box, I like to put a red rag on the bottom of it. So that way it sucks up the, it soaks up the coolant, just a little bit of extra coolant that there is just from, you know, just from the hose and stuff. So kind of shake it and then put it all back. And now we're gonna have to adjust the coolant level. All right, and in this case, I'm gonna use my fluid evacuator because it filled this coolant all the way to the top. There's really no way around this because you got to make sure that your thermostat is filled all the way through. So unfortunately in this system, in this one here, wasted a little bit of coolant, but I want to make sure it's filled right, and that's really all that matters, is making sure that it's filled correctly. because in the end, if it's not, well, then you got big problems. So, all right. All right, so now we have the coolant level where it needs to be. We've put the machine away. Now we have successfully filled this cooling system all the way through, up through the thermostat. So I can essentially put the cap on this thing and just go drive it and I won't have any problems. Okay, so now I want to talk about the 1% of the time that things don't go right. Now, I filled 2 vehicles during the course of this video. One of them was a 2000 Toyota, 02 Toyota, I can't remember what year it was, but it had a little tiny neck of the radiator, okay? I had to hurry up and switch the connections because the vacuum was dropping off. Now, this vehicle had no coolant leaks, so that vacuum drop off is normal. It's just because of the connection. But now here was my issue. This does not happen hardly ever. I've actually only had this happen a couple times in, man, like at least probably 8 years, only twice, where it didn't suck everything open, it didn't backfill the cooling system properly. And so in this situation, I turned on the heater never got hot, and eventually the temperature started rising up, okay? So lower hose is stone cold. Thermostat stuck. All right, had to stop. Had to sell a thermostat, turn around, put a thermostat in it, all right? So now I have a better cooling system because my thermostat's not sticking. However, I still have no heat. I'm sitting there running it. So what happened is the heater core got full of air and I couldn't get the heater core to bleed, which caused the cooling system to have a problem. So what I ended up having to do was pop the cap, release all the pressure. I felt the lower hose building up with tons of pressure. It wasn't cold, but it wasn't warm. All right, then I had to put my spill-proof funnel on there, and I had to run it, and it probably took me about 15 minutes to get everything working right. So I had to sit there with my foot on the throttle, about 2,000 RPMs. You want to make sure you keep that coolant level low in the funnel, because whenever you're trying to bleed a cooling system, it will push that coolant, and when it starts to go, it'll go. And I've seen it go from nothing in the funnel all the way to overflowing. So this thing had steam coming out of the funnel, but I still had no heat. So I had to just be diligent. Now it wasn't overheating. The temperature wasn't going over half. However, I just didn't have any heat. So I had to run this thing with my foot on the throttle, watching the funnel to make sure that the coolant wasn't rising. And it took, like I said, about 15 minutes to get it to be bled. And then once I had hot heat out of the vents, everything was good. So you want to make sure that you check this, and like I've said it in previous videos, my spill-proof funnel, I almost never use it. This is one of those cases where I had to use it, and I got it to work. So be careful with that. Make sure you turn your heater on. Make sure it blows hot. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you go back and watch this a couple times, and it shows you how to use this tool. Thought about making this tool because in the past, I had a couple employees, a couple guys under me that I required that everybody buy an AIRLIFT because they were having such problems filling cooling systems. And one guy, he just wouldn't use it. And finally I went up to him, I was like, you bought this AIRLIFT, why don't you use it? And he told me it didn't work. And I asked him to show me how he's using it. Well, he was using it wrong. He was not filling the cooling system properly. And so therefore it wasn't working. So I showed him how to do it. Different person at that point. He was super stoked. He used that thing every time and never had a problem. So hopefully this helps you. This is my many years of using this thing, and everything works good for me. So I hope it works good for you. Click the like button, hit the subscribe button, and hit the bell. You get notified of all my future content, which you're definitely going to want to see. And if you have any questions, leave a comment in the book and leave a question in the comments below, and I'll be sure to answer that. Or hit me up on Instagram at Nuts and Bolts with Tone. Daily life as a mechanic, show you tools. I'm working with some tool companies. They send me a lot of tools to check out, and a lot of times I share those in my stories. I show you guys good tools that I recommend that you buy. So thanks again for watching. I'll see you next time.